My first musical instrument was trumpet and flugelhorn. So I started playing music when I was in junior high school, and I wanted a saxophone, but they did not have any saxophones available. What was available was trumpet and or flugelhorn. So I chose, at the time, flugelhorn, and I played it. And during the course of the year, I switched between flugelhorn and trumpet. So that was first, and I really did like trumpet. I could, I would, I think I would have been an okay trumpet player, but my heart really was on the saxophone. So a year later, I was able to purchase saxophone myself, and I did. I got an alto. My mom bought me an alto, con alto sax, and that was it. I loved it, and by the time I was, I would say, 13 or 14, I knew I wanted to play music. Well, my upbringing, well, let's put it this way. We did have jazz records in our house, but there not really a lot of them. We had Count Basie records, Duke Ellington records. I can remember Charlie Ventura records. Um, so we did have records, but no one played in my family. My mom played piano as a child, very little, and but as an adult and my life, my life with her, I never really saw her play piano. So um, I don't know. I guess maybe whatever little talent I have, I might have gotten it from her. But I got interested in jazz when someone told me about Charlie Parker, and a little saxophone player that was maybe a year older than I told me about Bird, and I got a chance to hear Charlie Parker in a candy store on a jukebox, and that was the first time I had heard that kind of jazz, bebop, and they also called it modern jazz at that time. And when I heard that, that was it. I was hooked. So I really did everything I could to find out about that particular genre of jazz music. You know, I read, and then there was a club in Detroit. I grew up in Detroit. There was a club right on my street, a couple blocks down, that featured the kind of jazz that I was interested in. And I started going to that club and standing outside and listening to the musicians. And I remember the house band at that club was Elvin Jones, Pepper Adams, Barry Harris, people like Paul Chambers, Billy Mitchell, Thad Jones. During this period, Miles lived in Detroit. Miles lived in Detroit for a couple years. He used to work at this club all the time. So I was very happy, and I knew this is what I wanted to do. The first paid gig was I used to play in Detroit for dances. So it wasn't clubs and bars because I played around town before I was able to to work in a bar. You had to be 21 to work in Detroit. So I worked dances, prom, school dances, and you know things like that. So those would be my first paid gigs. Hmm. Well, um, I wasn't really what you would call formally trained. You know, I didn't go to any universities. But I did learn from a piano player that lived in my neighborhood, and his name is Barry Harris. And Barry was formally trained, a very well trained pianist. And he showed me about harmony and theory and things like that. So I learned a lot from him. And I learned from listening and going to hear people play, from listening to records, from listening to local wonderful musicians, and asking questions. And so I did that. By the time I was 19, I was playing gigs. I could play reasonably well, you know. And I was playing gigs. And at 20, about 20, I moved to New York. And this was the thing to do for young jazz musicians, wherever you were from, to hone your craft and then eventually go to New York, because this is where all the great musicians are, all the record companies, all the networking. And so this was to be done by most young players, no matter what town they were from. So I went to New York, and I had saved enough money to last about 3 or 4 months. And if I had not been able to get into a working band, I would have had to come back home and go save more money and try it again. And fortunately, I did land a job with Charlie Mingus. And that began pretty much a 12-year association with Mingus from 1960 to about 1972. Now from the Mingus experience, I learned a lot. I learned musically. I think I was maybe mostly impressed by his compositions, and his writing, and especially his ballad writing. I do now, and also thought then that his ballad writing was particularly beautiful and haunting. He had and very unusual. So I was impressed with that, and I think out of the Mingus experience, that might be the one, musically at least, that I got most out of that. And now Mingus was a very complicated person, and so just being around him for 12 years or so, there were just 1,000 issues that would pop up that you could write a book about. So I learned about life, you know, as we all do, just from living. But Mingus, the association with Mingus was a cram course in a lot of things, including music, you know, and very interesting experience. Okay, Charles McPherson.
Great.
Good.